As a big RPG fan, I'm interested in playing RPGs from the biggest studios in the world like a Starfield from Bethesda, but I'm also always on the lookout for smaller RPGs from a smaller studio like a Sea of Star from Sabotage Studio, for example. It gets even more interesting for me when a developer or a publisher talks about a new RPG, a new IP that is inspired by one of my personal favorites. Needless to say that when StudioSai announced Eternights, a big action RPG inspired by none other than the Persona series, I was stoked. Here is my official, non-spoiler review for Eternights. Please note that a review copy was provided by StudioSai for Eternights on PlayStation 5. Before I get into this review, I feel it's important to say that Eternights was developed by one person from start to finish using the Unity engine. StudioSai has openly told us that they are now a bigger team working on another game. In other words, Eternights is an indie game being sold for $30, and I will review the game with this information in mind today. The story of Eternights is fairly simple. You play as an 18-year-old boy who wants to meet his loved one. As you fall asleep before going on a date with an unknown girl, you wake up in a world that has just got destroyed and is facing an apocalypse, basically. Most importantly, your arms got cut up during your dream, and now you have a flashy sword arm. As you try and figure out how to save yourself, you meet other party members along the way who are instantly willing to help you in your journey because of how clueless they also are. Now you may be thinking that this story sounds a little convoluted, right? Well, that is probably because it kinda is, sadly. In Eternights, a lot is left unexplained, or when the game gives an explanation to the player, more often than not, it is kind of a mess. I have to be honest, the story had a mysterious aura through the whole game, but everything is paced in such a weird way that I had a hard time being hooked to its character and main story. It certainly gets more interesting after you start meeting new party members after the first batch, but it felt lacking even with a full party. When I say the pacing is odd, here's an example. Sometimes you're in an intense moment between two party members, the music is all hype and everything, and then the game will switch to another scene in a matter of seconds. Transitions are pretty much non-existent. It is way too fast, and it really took me away from the story on multiple occasions. It feels weird to say this, but the game is going too fast at times. It does not give you enough information to process what's happening and actually feel something. That being said, the characters clearly had love put into them by the developers. They look simple but have distinct personalities, and I found myself enjoying interactions between party members most of the time. I'd say about 90% of the game is voiced, and the voice acting is great. The studio hired some big names, including some that you will certainly recognize if you played some Atlas RPGs before. Sadly, the humor in Eternights really is not for me. Most of the time, I would cringe when the game tries a little too hard with its humor. There is a few scenes that really left me wondering, they really thought we would laugh at this? Again, just another little thing that took me out of the experience. Like, come on, bro. I am someone who's able to laugh at immature stuff. I am a young person, right? I have what I feel is an open sense of humor, but really this was not for me. Now, when you're progressing through the main game, you have to get out of your main base, which is a train, to go explore the city, which is destroyed. When the apocalypse started, walls came out of the ground to block the heart of the city. You must destroy each of the wall to reach your objective, which I won't spoil today. My biggest gripe, an example of how sometimes the ideas of the game feel out of place, is how you actually destroy a wall, which is the main objective of the story. One of your party member is an idol. She's called Yuna, and at the end of a dungeon, when you're facing the wall, the infamous wall that you have to destroy, Yuna, or later in the game, another party member, they have to use a dancing board to destroy the wall. That's right, I'm talking a Dance Dance Revolution style board. Not only is the dancing really an out there idea, but it's also a really rough minigame. At the time of the review, there was no tutorial for that game, but we reached out to the developers and they confirmed that before the game launches for you guys on September 6th, it will be patched in. So there will be a tutorial for that at least, because it took us like 10-20 minutes to figure it out at first. Regardless of if there's a tutorial or not, I feel the idea is very strange and poorly executed, sadly. And you have to do that dancing stuff for every wall, like constantly when you're playing the game. It's strange. You feel the tension building as you explore the dungeon, you fight big enemies, creepy bosses, but when you beat them, you have to dance. Now, on a more positive note, the presentation of this RPG is honestly not bad at all for such a small studio. The visuals are great. They went with a simple style that is unique enough to stand out from pretty much anything else in the genre. The flashy visuals, especially in combat, are impressive, and this is certainly uncommon for games of that scope. That being said, a cheaper game generally comes with a smaller budget during development, and as expected, it kind of shows at times with Eternights. The UI is very simple, the font choices are basic, the loading screens, well, there's none, it's just a loading bar with a black screen, etc. I do want to stress that in no way this deteriorated my enjoyment of the game, but just keep that in mind and don't go in expecting a big AAA presentation. 3D models for the character are simple looking, but also very clean. That being said, I feel choosing to use those models as character portraits was a bad idea, in my opinion. 2D portraits during character dialogues would have been a way better choice, especially since they do have those 2D models. When you rank up a social link with one of your character, you can see how clean those 2D models look, and I wish those were used for the character dialogue. One thing that I found very impressive in terms of visuals are the anime cutscenes. There is not a lot of them, and most of them are short, but they look absolutely stunning and give life to important scenes that otherwise would not necessarily stand out with the regular 3D models. Sometimes during story sequences, the game switches from the regular 3D models to a hand-drawn visual style, and those scenes look absolutely amazing. I loved it when the game pulled unexpected moves on me in terms of visuals, and anime cutscenes are one big example, but my favorite part is at a certain point in the game, the game switches from a 3D perspective to a 2D or a 2.5D perspective, and it looked absolutely insane with the lighting effects and everything. It looked absolutely awesome. Loved it, loved it, loved it. In terms of performance, it's unsurprising really. The game runs flawlessly on PlayStation 5. Loading times are decent. There's a stable frame rate through the whole thing, whether you're in combat or just doing a social link, a social interaction. And there are some very impressive scenes with the lightning and shades, as I mentioned earlier. One thing that the developer really nailed is the tone and atmosphere of Eternights. Even with how certain elements took me out of the experience, the game still managed to keep me hooked, especially during the dungeon crawling sequences. A good way to describe my experience with the game is there is some very high highs, but also some very low lows. Now let's talk about what's good here for a second. The gameplay in Eternights is very similar to the gameplay of a Persona game, which can be good, it can be bad as well. Hear me out. You have a calendar system. You play the game day by day by choosing how you want to spend your time. Do you want to scavenge items to increase your party member stat? Or maybe you want to spend time with a party member to forge a deeper bond with them or get in a relationship with them. And just like Persona, for the main story, you have a deadline to meet for each one of the chapters, which are acts in Eternights. This calendar system works well and is well executed. It just works. It's totally fine. But it's exactly what you would find in a Persona game, but simpler and more basic. I just wish the developer would do something of their own and put their own touch and ideas and took inspiration from Persona instead of trying and replicate the exact same concept of having a calendar system, a deadline for each act and everything. StudioSai and the developer of the game are able to create some very unique stuff, and I wish they put this uniqueness inside the calendar system instead of trying to replicate what Atlus is doing with Persona. The exploration itself is extremely fun though. You explore dungeons in typical dungeon crawling fashion. The dungeons are diverse and interesting to explore, although a little simple in terms of designs. There are some puzzles inside dungeons, and those are a mixed bag as well. Sometimes there are challenging and intriguing little puzzles, while other times there are simple puzzles that are like too slow, and they're just there to basically extend the length of the game, I feel like. The best thing about dungeons has to be the combat though. You will encounter various types of enemies while exploring dungeons, and the designs and look of the enemies are great. Most of the enemies are very detailed and interestingly designed, very unique. They're not your typical generic enemy that you would find in other small RPGs. Generally speaking, I found myself enjoying the enemy designs more than even the main casts. When you first fight a bunch of enemies, the first thing that is noticeable is how quickly you get in and out of combat. It's very fluid and enjoyable, which makes fighting enemies a ton of fun. It can be a pain sometimes in big dungeon crawlers to have to make a lot of encounters, but it certainly is not the case in Eternights, and that is a massive thumbs up for this game. And also, I have to be honest here, I generally am not a big fan of action combat, but for some reason, I found myself having a decent amount of fun with the combat in this game. I played the game on normal difficulty, which was fairly challenging for me, but you also have an easy mode and a hard mode, so feel free to experiment which mode you feel would be the best for you. The combat is very fast-paced, the visuals are super impressive in combat, and the big skill tree offers a ton of customization options which kept me hooked and motivated through my playthrough. It is very satisfying to pull combos to destroy different types of enemies. It is not a button masher. It is not a brain dead game either. Most enemies have different weaknesses and resistance, and hitting them in a specific way can be a must at times, and I'm not exaggerating here. As you deepen your bonds with characters in social interactions, you can start learning moves to use with them in battle. Yuna gives you fire skills at some point, while Chani will heal you. And as the player, you not only control the main character, but also other party members in combat. You get to perform a move and decide on which enemy you want to act. This combat seems very simple when you first start the game, but there is a lot of depth to it. Regardless of me being a turn-based RPG fan and not an action fan, the combat in Eternights is where I found the most fun out of the game. Good job to StudioSai on that one. I know what some of y'all are going to ask, the social links and social interactions. Again, the characters are interesting for the most part. They do focus on dating way more than in Persona, which can be a good thing for some and bad thing for others. I found most characters to be okay and not that memorable, if I'm being honest, but I found the social interactions to be generally fun, which, hey, I had fun going through them regardless of their issues. Now, if you know me, as always with my reviews, I have to talk about the music and sound in the game. The soundtrack for Eternights, to be honest, is not particularly special in my opinion, but it certainly gets the job done. In terms of audio though, I 1000% have to mention the music playing in dungeons. Most specifically in combat. Sometimes you have to run away from certain enemies in dungeons and you can hear their footsteps through the rhythm of the background music, and that felt awesome. It's very, very immersive. Oh, and I must not forget to mention that during those specific moments, the game utilizes the haptics feedback of the PS5 DualSense, so you can also feel the enemy footsteps in the controller. Wow, I was not expecting that at all. So the haptics combined with the music was amazing, and again, very, very impressive for a game of that scope. Overall, just a big thumbs up to the music because it really, really helped with the tone of the game. As I mentioned before, my big thing is the humor kind of took me away from the tone of the game, right? Took me away from the experience, while the music pulled me back in, right? So basically, is Eternights my game of the year? No. Is it a game worth playing? I'd say yes, I would recommend it if you can bear the cringy humor, which again, it might not be for you, it was for me. The lack of uniqueness for the story, yes, I would recommend it if you can bear with the humor and also the lack of uniqueness for the story. That being said, the fun combat, the well-executed tone, and good music are all a very solid plus for the game, and I'm not ashamed to say that regardless of my multiple complaints for Eternights, I can recommend it if you listen to the whole review and are fine with the criticism, and I certainly will be there day one for StudioSai's next release, and I think this game is a solid game, especially knowing that it's one person who made it, so congratulations to StudioSai, and once again, thank you for the review code here for Eternights on PlayStation 5. Thank you all so much for watching the review for Eternights. If you want more RPG content, weekly RPG content, make sure you subscribe, ring that notification bell as well, and please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. It helps people find my channel. You have a great day, y'all. Bye.